be available afterwards as a for people to listen to and download as well. We also have a live feed on Twitter, courtesy of Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, for this. All right, we're going to make a start. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. ArbTech is delighted to have Alessandro Palombo, CEO of JUR, joining us to present JUR's vision and new interest in the network state. I will provide a little bit of an introduction of what that is, as well as a bio for Alessandro and our commentator, Kelby Ballena. I'm going to do that now. What is the network state and why should we care? As Kelby has very aptly put in his LinkedIn feed, is a very good question, especially from the legal perspective. Alessandro will explain, and it's very interesting to see JUR's journey towards the network state, for starting from a former interest, and still an ongoing interest, I think, in dispute resolution for the new Web3 economy, and for something that is affordable, that relates to users' values, and then how this will play a part in the network state. The network state essentially, Ali has written an extremely interesting article that you can find on JUR's website at jur.io on the network state revolution, which is a commentary on the network state as conceived by someone who is in the United States, called Balaji Srinivasan, who came up with the idea in a book a few years ago. And essentially what JUR is looking at now is version 2 of the network state. And I find it very interesting that in his article, Ali talks about the network state as being an inevitable phenomenon that, like Bitcoin, is destined to bring about profound social revisions in the power balance between citizens and governments. Essentially, it is a new social construct where communities can go online and organize themselves in the way that they want, essentially. And my understanding, and we'll find out about Ali very soon, is JUR seeks to facilitate that with Web3 technology. We, of course, at ArbTech are extremely interested in this upending of societal pillars, of which, of course, dispute resolution is one. And dispute resolution, how is that going to occur in those new online social arrangements, is something that should be of extreme interest to everyone. At the same time, I know from this article and from speaking to Ali that JUR is also extremely focused on governance, and governance, of course, is the Achilles heel, I would say, perhaps, of the Web3 economy as we know it, and that's going to be very interesting as well. So very quickly on Ali, he is, of course, a tech entrepreneur, the founder of JUR, and he advises public and private entity on the topics of legal technology and blockchain, including at Oxford University, at the Deep Tech Dispute Resolution Lab, and at the Astana International Financial Center. He is admitted to practice law. He holds a PhD in public law and a master in global regulation of markets from the Sapienza University of Rome. Our commentator, Kelby Ballena, is a paralegal. He has been doing this in international arbitration for the past 20 years. And he joined the Americas group at Allen & Overy a year ago. And he is extremely interested in following the tech innovations that are actually present use cases for attorneys, particularly in the field of international arbitration. He is this week at the New York Legal Tech Week, where he is sampling all that is on offer. He is planning to get a certification as a drone pilot, which he's just told us this morning, which I think is fantastic. Maybe all of us should think about that in terms of evidence gathering in the short term. Okay, without further ado, please, Ali, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sophie. I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited to be, again, with ArbTech. I really like what you're doing at ArbTech with all these amazing community of innovative arbitrators. So it's my pleasure to present and introduce probably today this topic. we will have in the next 30-40 minutes so many actually probably observations to share and eventually discussions to have together. I would like just to open with one broader consideration. So sometimes it happens in technology, it happened with the NFT, for example, that maybe a certain topic starts to be discussed, and then only after maybe 1, 2, 3 years, actually, it becomes mainstream. Probably this was also the same path for the so-called DAOs, or decentralized autonomous organizations. There was a specific moment in time, in, if I'm not wrong, in 2016, after the DAO, the first one, and for sure in 2017, when the same concept of DAO was extremely new and highly actually arguable. So certain concepts, especially in Web3, not only in tech, are a bit vague at the beginning, and they are subject to progressive testing. So I would like to say that this whole concept currently named the network state, in my view, is the equivalent of probably discussing about NFTs in 2017. Nobody knows exactly how this specific vertical will look like in 12, 24, 36 months, but everyone starts agreeing why this topic is interesting, and that's why we start actually discussing about this subject matter, and in our case, as Jure, to practice and build in this vertical. So without actually further ado, I would like to actually accompany you in a presentation I had the pleasure to do in Lisbon a couple of months ago. So I'm going to reuse this presentation done for a slightly different purpose. I hope this will be interesting for you, and I just ask you the courtesy to wait for the final actually slide, because hopefully if you have some questions, maybe a good 70% of them will be answered by the slides, maybe in the second or third chapter of this presentation. So the goal, as you can see here, is to provide an overview. I will give you quite clearly due disclaimers when some specific actually information or concept is debatable, and I will instead tell you when, I mean, something I'm sharing is quite, I mean, objectively, at least in my own opinion, it's quite objective. So that said, let me give you, I will start giving you an introduction about which is the background of this network state concept. So let's, for us at least, all coming from the legal, actually, a legal background, let's have a very quick and unusual refresh about key concepts such as states, nations, and their eventually relationship with the internet. We will also go through probably theoretical explanation of what a network state is before diving down in a concrete example, which in my view will be crucial, because sometimes when we debate about these Web3 topics, there could be actually the danger to go into very complex rabbit holes, and sometimes it's better to look at an example and take the time to reflect together and see, okay, this makes sense or this doesn't make sense, and so far and so on. That said, so let's talk about states, nations, and the internet. So something that probably for us coming from a more legal background is less given for granted is that you know, the same concept of state and a borderless economy are in very closely connected. As a reminder, what is a nation and what is a nation, or what is a state? So in general terms, despite, I mean, the differences in doctrine, in general, we could consider nations as large body of people united by commonalities. Commonalities can be meant as common descent, history, culture, language. Usually, the group of people inhabits a particular specific territory. In the case of the state, as you might remember from one of the probably initial exams in the law faculty, typically states are bodies which are, and concepts, sorry, that are characterized by the presence of 4 essential elements. Depending on the doctrine, these elements can be 3, can slightly change, but overall, the component of a state are territory, population, sovereignty, and government. So territory for sure entails the concept of a specific physical territory bound by borders. Population, a group of people which resides in a determined territory on a permanent basis. The permanent basis is very important, of course. And sovereignty, which is a concept that, as we all know, implies the fact that a specific authority doesn't require the consent of any superior authority. So it's the ultimate or the ultimality as a characteristic of a specific power. Government, as we all know, an apparatus of sovereignty, which possesses a specific power of commanding over the people in a specific territory. So these are the four elements of a state. So usually this is a very important differentiator for non-legal actually people, because otherwise someone might mistakenly confuse the concept of nation and the concept of state. Someone might think, oh, they are the same thing. Actually, no, because the nation typically is the group of people, and the state usually is recognizable as the apparatus which governs that group of people. With that said, this is just the ABC of something we have studied maybe in multiple phases of our career, but what is interesting is to address this topic from a slightly different angle, which is a bit more sociologic. And probably we have not spent enough time in the past considering how technological innovation was central also for the creation of the same concept of states. Why this is so important and why I'm bringing this to you. And again, very briefly, I'm going to go fast on these slides because I'm assuming these are concepts that you know really well. If you want, we can come back on them and expand them. And, you know, please, I'm really looking forward to answer to your questions afterwards. Now, there is an interesting perspective from a quite famous historian, Benedict Anderson, according to which the printing press, Gutenberg, had a very important impact on the same rise of the concept of states. Specifically, from his perspective, the mass vernacular newspapers led the basis for creating a collective experience among people that were not physically that close. So before the printing press, it was very difficult even for a person maybe in Brighton to share the same experience of life compared to a person living in London, right? Because let's remember that until the 18th century, if you read there are a few interesting books on this, that touches on these points, but the typical life of the peasant at that time, main economy was predominantly spent in the area of 6 or 8 miles from home. So before the printing press, the collective experience of a community was predominantly physical. With the printing press, and arguably with the development of an economy based also on mass vernacular newspapers, this changed. In other words, people maybe that were living in Brighton or in London or in other areas of the UK, or the same for other current countries, started feeling the same experience of life and sharing the same culture. From a different perspective, and again, going very fast on these topics, there is also a myth that it's important to debunk together. If we look from an historic perspective, the United Nations membership grew a lot in the last decades. If we look at this chart on the right side of the screen, from the 1945 to the 1998, the number of admitted countries in the UN grew a lot, up to close to, I don't remember right now how many they are, but they grew up exponentially over the last 50 years. This is something that I maybe stress, because even for us, sometimes the concept of country is a bit immutable, or it seems eternal, when in the end, we could argue, and example like Catalonia or similar ones could actually maybe generate in us I think a meaningful doubt about how immutable the concept of country or state should be, or could be. I don't want to dive down too much on this topic, but let's keep in mind that if you, I don't know where are you from, but if you take as an example the constitution or the constitutional chart of your country, I don't know which country are you from, but it's very likely it was adopted maybe in the 50s, in the 40s of the last century, or ideally it was not that old, right? In the case of Italy, 1948, makes me think that the same constitutional chart was not, I mean, eternal, right? Of course, the constitutional process of every country, lasted many decades in every specific country. But again, in general terms, if we think about how ancient is the same constitutional chart of European countries, we will discover that they are not so old. Now, so what and why this very actually historical based and a bit very long introduction. So there is one concept that I believe in this case to be quite objective, and I think that we all can probably agree on that, which actually is let's analyze how the internet impacted on the current economy, and let's also analyze how the world changed in the last more or less 30 years, so before the internet. Arguably, today, the internet helped allow the creation of digital native communities. You can take as an example, for example, in Web3, Discord-based communities. Despite Web3, I think we all agree that today the economy became progressively more globalized, thanks also to the internet. The e-commerce actually economy since the 90s onwards changed also the perspective of how consumers can purchase goods and services online. In this context, I would argue the importance of the physical borders decreased. So I don't have data in this slide, but arguably the importance of a physical border in the 80s of the last century was considerably higher than the physical border importance of, for example, in 2023. Something even that I would like to push these considerations to, an area which is more arguable and subjective. I think you all know the concept of memes, right? Or GIFs. I think if you sometimes spend time on Telegram, I think you are abundantly exposed to them. Or on Twitter, of course, right? So Elon Musk, apparently is a great, is one of probably the kings of the memes nowadays. There is an interesting author which actually wrote that the memes represent a sort of modern koine dialectos, or common language, which is understood by people coming from completely different countries. So maybe an African-born person, 20 years old, might have the same understanding of a meme that someone born and bred in London have. This is quite interesting, right? Because before the internet, this same concept was not that possible. And of course, this is a bit an exaggeration, but I'm bringing this to you for initiating a conversation. So whatever we believe, in any case, I think that nowadays it's non-contestable to say that people can interact, do business, and also own assets with Web3 independently from the existing of a national border, and eventually, sometimes, independently from the state of protection, especially if you hold crypto assets and you store them owning your own keys, as it's always advisable. You, technically wise, you are not relying on the protection of anybody, of course, except the physical, safety that arguably is provided by a specific state. So why I'm bringing this topic to you? If we look at the charts and we look how the internet usage grew in the last more or less 30 years, we can see how this growth has been exponential. Today, the majority of the population on this planet is using daily internet. And if we look also at the adoption of the cryptocurrencies, with all the good sides and the bad sides, of course, in the last few years increased quite exponentially. That chart, if I'm not wrong, regarded actually gives a snapshot of the overall cryptocurrency market right now. So why I'm sharing this data with you and this information is with you? So in my view, and again, this is a subjective take, but I think it's quite agreeable. We are living in these years a sort of transitioning period that I could define as a kind of digital Copernican revolution, where the relationship between the physical world and the digital world is going to change, as it probably even more happened in the last 30 years. Why? Because today, very often, I mean, the digital realm is the place where consciousness is formed. Let's think about news, how we absorb, elaborate, and discuss news regarding our own community or country or city. We could also say that we build relationship online. Very often, these relationships are built online before them being physical. There are some data and studies about how many, actually even couples are today, they meet on the first time through dating applications, right? And I think we all have friends or ourselves, we met our partner maybe using a dating application which is online, and this is something, I'm sure that if someone told this 20 years ago to somebody I don't know, to yourself probably 10 years ago, you would have said, oh, this is completely impossible. I won't ever meet my partner online through a dating app. This is completely crap. It is not going to work. And instead, statistically wise, I don't have these statistics freshly in mind, but we can Google them afterwards. This is a very non-challengeable trend. Culture. I think that through Instagram or other tools that you might use every day, there is a good component of culture that is progressively coming more and more online. For sure, the physical, heritage is super important. I'm telling this also as a person born and bred in Rome, but I think that the trend is gonna progressively still change. And by the way, for sure, the scarce resources are going to be, in my view, in the next 10 years, exponentially be linked to the digital world compared to the physical world. We could make many examples. Let's think also about how the scarcity in Bitcoin is pre-programmed differently from even the scarcity in diamonds, for example, where there is a specific management in order to ensure scarcity and so far and so on. So arguably, I would say in the next 10 years, there will be the completion of a revolution, which is already actually at a probably more than an early stage, where the digital world as a whole will have a, I would say, heavier weight in terms of community creation, relationships, culture, and even scarce resources management compared to the physical world. We could expand these topics and this debate then, but why I'm doing this kind of presentation, which is high level, and how does this relate with the topic that regards the network state? So I chose a few months ago to put in this presentation a slide or borrowed from a Balaji, and I will simply probably follow his narrative just for putting in your mind a kind of provocatory doubt. Okay, so this is clearly a provocation, which is if you think, in 1998, a new company, which arguably changed the world, was founded, and that was Google. It was 1998. It was not. If you think for a while, sounds crazy, right? At least I sometimes think, oh, Google is much older, right? No, it's 1998. And they were born in a garage. Facebook, so new communities, online communities, it was 2004. New currencies, the Bitcoin white paper, 2008. And so the provocation is new companies have been founded and they scale to billions of users. New communities or social networks have been founded, and today they host probably the majority of the population worldwide. Even new currencies have been founded. And again, even 20 years ago, before Bitcoin, that would have still now by probably a lot of people, this is taken as a crazy thing, right? So if companies, communities, and currencies have been founded, why would be impossible or non-preferable create new countries or new states? So this is I would say, the provocation with which this concept of the network state has been created. what is, therefore, a network state? And let's dive down into the theoretical, actually, definition so that we can visualize together the same thing. Before I start, I would like to make a disclaimer. The disclaimer is, I'm using this terminology for simplicity, because there is a beautiful book written by Balaji Srinivasan, who has been a general partner at Andreessen Horowitz, one of the most important VCs worldwide, venture capital firms. He made a very important exit in the health tech space, if I'm not wrong, above 300 millions. And he's definitely one of the strongest influencers, also on Twitter, with more than 800,000 followers. He wrote a book. I suggest you to read the book. I don't agree 100% with what it's his vision of the network state, and even the name network state, in my view, could be challenged. But given the authority of this person, given the fact that we need to agree on terms for even having a smoother conversation, I will use this terminology right now. Okay, so this is the disclaimer I wanted to share it with you. That said, what is a network state? My definition, which is more comprehensive compared to the Balaji one, is it's a state which has an on-chain social contract and doesn't necessarily have the physical territory as an essential element. So it's a state without borders whose social contract is made on-chain. This is, in my view, my interpretation, which is very lean and very minimalistic, of the why behind this concept and the why behind this movement. And this is the reason why, personally, I'm very excited. And I think this is one thing that should come into existence in the next 10 years. Why? Because ultimately, my interpretation of this whole matter is to create and give an alternative to current forms of physical states, where the exercise of citizenship's rights happen in a direct way. So as Web3 or Bitcoin, for simplicity, allowed for the first time the direct ownership of assets without intermediary of sort, from a theoretical perspective, I believe that there will be an analogous, a similar approach with regard to the governance or management of large-sized groups of people, states. Why this actually approach should be, at least theoretically wise, better? In very simple terms, and we can make this topic also more complex and argue around that, but in very simple terms, it's the same analogy between banks and Bitcoin. I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist, but I think that objectively speaking, I think we should all agree on the fact that owning your own keys and not relying on a third party, which might fail, and a party, by the way, who is not insured above a certain threshold. So as we have seen last week in the US, in the case of SBV, the insurance was, the federal insurance, if not wrong, was until the threshold of 250K. That means that in case of failure, which didn't happen, thankfully, if you had more than 250K on the bank, you would have lost that money. So with Bitcoin, you can have direct ownership, arguably, of an asset, which of course is highly volatile right now, but still you have the full ownership of that asset without relying on any intermediary party. So that is what actually truth, or in Web3 terms, means. You don't need to trust your bank. You can access directly to a decentralized or distributed protocol and make sure that the balance of your assets is there. This topic is very delicate, okay? So I'm going to make one statement, but we should come on this, okay? One advantage of this concept of network states would be arguably also the easiness to opt in and opt out. Again, this is a bit controversial, so disclaimer, but if you are born and live in a specific country, you know how hard it is to get citizenship, and even sometimes to lose the citizenship, right? Now, I'm not saying right now if this is right or wrong. I'm just making a general observation, which is the direction or the trend of this movement will be to enable an easiness to opt in and opt out from these network states. With the same probably simplicity, you can activate a Netflix membership and cancel your Netflix membership. You might do the same for a network state. Is this better or worse compared to the current state of the art? I don't have the final answer, so I don't pretend to teach you something, but I tend to think that competition is always a good thing. So if you enable people to easily opt out from a specific form of governance, which ultimately is a conglomerate of services, mainly, I would argue, insurance type of services, probably the market will be pushed in order to create progressively better and better services. So this is another reason why this movement might one day be very important for the humanity. And last but not least, if properly built, one network state, or again, one specific typology of network states, could be also very interesting, because if, again, properly built using Web3 technologies, you can ultimately trust how it is built, because you can verify directly how the on-chain logic is built. So there is no need of, oh, I trust someone or an auditor that tells me that the treasury management logic has been built in a specific way. You can, theoretically wise, access and control how every major dynamic of that organization is managed on-chain. So you don't need to trust a third party, but you can verify that your own government, state, whatever, organization act in a specific way. So in the niche of crypto circles, this concept is explained in the sense of can't be evil instead of don't be evil. So technically wise, you build constructs that can't simply act in a bad way, because the dynamic of that action is coded on-chain. We could open a very vast debate about all these points. I just want to give you an overview right now. Okay, I'm going to go slightly faster, otherwise we won't make it in the predefined time. And sorry for that, but this was a presentation that I made a few months ago. I didn't have the chance to do a complete rehearsal, so I'm even now a bit readjusting what I'm saying to you. So what is this network state, in my view, will end be like DAOs, okay? It won't be a single specific concept. It will be a spectrum of different concepts, even as, for example, DAOs today. If you go online and you check 2 or 3 different DAOs, probably every DAO will have his own approach and interpretation of the same concept of DAO. I expect the same to apply for the network state. With that said, at least for clarity, I would like to bring to you the blueprint of a network state from Balaji Srinivasan in 5 minutes. With one important disclaimer: I don't think that this will be the only blueprint for network states. I don't even think that this is arguably, from a theoretical perspective, the best definition. However, I do believe that this blueprint is extremely effective from an action planning perspective. So Balaji, in my view, is super strong in identifying a feasible path for creating a network state. What he proposes as that action plan is a sequence of stages for this new entity, which can be described in according to 4 major inflection points that this entity might reach. Step 1, there must be a social network. This social network is not a simple social network like an Instagram account for grandma recipes, despite everyone loves grandma recipes for sure. There is no moral innovation in that. So eventually this social network needs to align people around one moral or set of moral principles. These principles could be arguable. As an example, there could be a sort of vegan community on Facebook or vegan Telegram chat. According to Balaji, the step one, which is definable as startup society, it has to be a social network with one, at least, moral innovation. Like in startups, there should be one feature that is highly disruptive and improves the quality of a specific service. There should be a sort of sense of national consciousness, which might be present in a sort of community based on grandma recipes. I'm just joking, but for sure it could be present around social networks that are built around quite important social causes, and there must be a recognized founder. This is something very disruptive, at least according to the typical Web3 approach, because according to the typical Web3 culture, let's take as an example the DAOs, there is decentralization since day one. Balaji's approach to the network state actually goes in the opposite direction. So at the stage one, there must be one strong leader, and then progressively this social network evolves in a more decentralized entity. So step one, startup society, is composed of these three key elements. Step two, only when this social network with a highly aligned community around a recognized founder reaches a stage of maturity where everyone feels to belong to something which is very important, at that point, there is a step of organizing the collective action. At this stage, the collective organization might take the shape and look of current DAOs, but it's different. So step one is everything starts with a set of values, which could even be, as we will see later in the example, we are digital nomads. We want to create a new country or a new sort of recognizable jurisdiction for digital nomads. Only once we are all together and we are maybe 5,000 people, we can start organizing ourselves. Eventually, we might even issue a cryptocurrency, but this is not mandatory. At that point, we could agree on a set of rules. We could agree that there is a president, or there is a chairman, or there is not a chairman. There is a voting system based on A, B, C, D, F, G parameters. Once this step is reached, eventually, and this is Balaji's approach again, not mine, he takes the example of multinational companies like Google. They already have multiple offices around the world. And in his perspective, these multiple offices around the world where people spend the most of the time of their days, they could be considered a sort of real estate footprint. So according to his perspective, these offices around the world, let's take WeWork or a large chain of co-working spaces as a very basic example. Let's say that you have 5,000 people living in these co-living spaces. It's easier. In 50 cities, you could argue, okay, they are somehow living in areas that are for sure subject to the jurisdiction of different states, but from a philosophical perspective, they feel to be living in a decentralized or a sort of territory, which is composed of a series of enclaves. Balaji's vision, and again, this is not from a legal perspective, this definition is not okay. We all know that, okay? But from a startup perspective, what he says that in my view makes a lot of sense is when one community has, for example, adopted an internal governance system, they might even have issued an internal cryptocurrency, and they have 50 co-living spaces around the world, and they are 10,000 people. At that point, there should be an on-chain census which prove that there is population, there is an income, and there is this real estate footprint, so that you can negotiate with an existing country or not, and potentially arrive to the stage of a new country creation. Clearly, this is a very visionary, for sure, explanation. And as I was giving you as a disclaimer, we are not talking about something that will happen probably in the next 12 months, but something that might happen in a few years from now. And again, I'm not sharing with you my own ideas on these points. I'm sharing with you the blueprint from Balaji for simplicity. So don't take this blueprint as coming from Jur or from Alessandro. I'm trying to give you a summary of the current main thesis, because I think this is what it's better to share at this stage of the maturity of this concept. Again, 4 major steps. Let's give the name to these 4 steps, according to Balaji, for sure, and this book. So these steps will be startup society first, network union, network archipelago, and network state. Network state specifically is when this network or this entity receives diplomatic recognition. According to also Balaji, not all the communities need to become a network state. There could be someone, maybe that for 20 years will remain happily a startup society or a network union. So also according to his perspective, this blueprint is not meant to be interpreted such as someone has to start a community and necessarily arrive to the step number 4. No, someone could start and be happy at a different or intermediate stage. With all this clarification made, there are inherent differences with DAOs. I would like to expand them. If you maybe ask me a question, if you're interested, I need to jump on this, otherwise I won't be able to complete this presentation. What I would like to, there are of course a few docs, of course, sorry for the self-quoting. There will be a few documents that you will find also generated by us or me or your community online. But I would advise to you to read at least the book online. It's for free on thenetworkstate.com. You can read even the introductory chapter. It's 1,000 words. It takes 10 minutes. And after these 10 minutes, you will feel more confused than you have been after this presentation. But I think it could be a great starting point. And you will find also a wiki on made by our community. This is a community-based initiative. So if you even want to contribute, you're absolutely welcome. You might receive rewards, prizes, and for sure a lot of appreciation from our community members. I really invite you to jump in, have fun, and contribute with a spirit of open source contribution. With that said, guys, let's have an example, because otherwise we have discussed about highly complex, arguable, and even, I would say, delicate topics that could be misinterpreted. So I try to make my best to be clear. But again, this is clearly something that would require a lot of time. So I hope I will make myself clear right now with one concrete example. So according to our perspective, which is not necessarily exactly Balaji's perspective, there will be a series of different visions for network states. There could be the most important categorization, probably 5 years from now, will be between ideologic network states and non-ideologic. So as an ideologic network state, for example, I would consider a vegan country whose foundational moral principle could be non-vegan products are not allowed here because everything non-vegan is bad. I've been vegan for 2 years of my life, so I can make this example without offending anyone. I've been pure vegan for 24 months, so I really fully respect this kind of choice. This could be an ideologic network state. There could be also non-ideologic network state, in my view. This could be potentially even more interesting, which means there could be new forms of organizations that don't start with an important superior moral cause, but instead with simply a superior, more qualitative offering of services as a sort of state. This is a point that is different from Balaji's perspective. So again, a disclaimer for you in case you want to read the book. Let's take an example of the non-ideologic network state, and let me introduce you, just for the purpose of this presentation, a non-ideologic digital nomad republic. The data are collected from the nomadlist.com. Who is the average nomad today? Is a 33 years old, progressive person, typically is not religious, typically is single, the majority is composed by white people, and so far and so on. You can read all this data publicly available on the nomadlist.com. According to this website, there are currently around 35 million of digital nomads around the world. And all of us, I have been, and partially I am a digital nomad person, we all share the same problem, which is living across jurisdictions is a bureaucratic nightmare. Could we, envision a sort of digital nation or digital state for us with a 10x better conglomerate of services that actually serve our needs much, much better, I think this is quite reasonable, right? And I feel that this could happen even in the shorter term. Also, let's remember that on average, according to this website, the average salary of digital nomads is about $85,000 per year. Where are they from? Are they coming from a different planet? No, digital nomads are, by almost the half of them, comes from the United States of America, followed by the UK, 2.2 million from Russia, and so far and so on. Even from Spain, 660,000. Why I'm sharing with you this example, and of course, this is going to be a provocation for you, but follows my introduction to this topic. The introduction when I was showing you how from the 1945 up to the 1998, according to that visual, the number of countries grew, right? And then plateaued about the end of the last century. If we get, hypothetically speaking, a 15% of penetration market of these total population of 35 million, we would ideally get about 5 million of population for this digital nomad republic. I'm taking 50% because typically 15–10% is the maximum success rate for new enterprises when you do these back on the napkin estimations for new businesses. And typically these top-down estimations are always wrong, but again, they give you an idea of how the business or this opportunity could grow. Let's assume for simplicity that this is the case. So we have 5 million people, maybe by 2035 or 2040, composing the population of this digital nomad republic. Again, this is just an example. In that case, we would obtain potentially a country which is smaller than Norway and large than Ireland. So this is very important because when we think about Ireland or Norway, we always think, oh, yeah, they've always been there, they're huge, and the countries are, for sure, the countries are huge. No, if you look at the majority of the countries, they are small. The composition of the countries worldwide is composed by larger part of small countries. That said, let's assume that this hypothetical digital republic asks for a membership of 250 euro or dollars per year. We would get about 1 billion plus of annual revenue, which maybe part of that could be paid for maybe renting, don't know, a sort of coverage from an existing jurisdiction, the free zone or special economic zone model, who knows? But again, I'm not proposing to you to invest on this business, it's just an idea that I'm sharing with you for the purpose of having a conversation with all the limits implied by, again, a very high level idea that is made also for letting you to think more about these concepts. So I made this example for you because I think it's quite interesting to have a concrete example of, oh, okay, this whole concept which seems completely crazy. Well, after all, after Bitcoin, after the DAOs, after DeFi, which is unregulated but still there, and I mean, I think we all have seen enough crazy things, right, happening in the last 10 years. I think that after all, this kind of vision, I don't think seems more crazy to me than actual concepts or movements or trends that have already impacted on the current market. So what are we doing at Jur? Very briefly, and on a very in very short terms. So we started as a dispute resolution focused Web3 project, which means a blockchain-based, for simplification purposes, blockchain-based arbitration procedure. We started Jur on the bear market on 2018. So it was, we had always have to manage actually the complexity of adverse market condition. And we pushed it through different phases of this market, and we grew over the past few years. And 1 year ago, we decided to make a pivot and expand the scope of Jur into something larger than dispute resolution. And probably the right larger category for jurisdiction is governance or DGov. So you will see in the next few months Jur explained as the leading project in the DGov or decentralized governance space. I believe that this will be the major trend of the next market cycle. We have released a testnet on Polkadot, so we became a Polkadot-based project. I could, of course, talk about this for a long time, but in short terms, we are building a vision of interoperability for the governance, which means we are creating a series of Lego blocks, which are trustless Lego blocks for many and many areas of potentially network states or also similar concepts. And they include citizenship, NFT passports, reputation, judicial, asset, services, insurance, legislative, and so far and so on. All these logics are inserted into a runtime, which is an autonomous substrate-based chain. What does it mean in layman terms? We are essentially creating a decentralized protocol of an infinite series of multiple Lego blocks for building sort of network states or letting DAOs receiving far additional services that typically are not offered within the DAOs. The building blocks we are building might be used one day also by existing governments. In order to let them to be used easily, we are creating a series of simple to use dApps. Some of them will be very fun, others will be quite serious and more B2B. We hope and we look forward to not be the only builder on this foundational stack. And we decided to build on Polkadot because of the interoperability. So this means that our building blocks can be used by every other player in Polkadot in a seamless way. In our view, this is the most future-proof way for building this stack, and we are building therefore what we define a sort of one-click country ecosystem in order to enable, first of all, experimentation in this area. Now, why we do this and why we are excited with this? Ultimately, what I want to achieve is again, it will take years, but it is a sort of system are built around a citizen dashboard. So in my view, that one of the true meanings of this concept is to enable a new form of citizenship where the citizen can access to a dashboard as you access to a dashboard for every online service nowadays and have direct control and access to the services of one state, one government, or one form of organizations. We are completely agnostic. By the end of the year, there will be an association owning the IP and everything regarding the protocol. So I will remain maybe the CEO of one company, which is one builder on this stack, but the protocol will be completely owned by the holders of the native utility token. And this is the reason why essentially we are tremendously excited for this vision. We will have in about 2 months a very important public news that for now I can't share, which will be a kind of game changer. So I look forward to see you keeping one eye on what we do and comment and interact. Of course, I could chat for hours about many aspects of the project, but in short terms, we are trying to do our best for enabling experimentation here with one major goal, which is nobody knows if this movement or this concept will be right or wrong. In my view, this will be, as said, the network state will become a spectrum of concepts, but what I do believe is important at this stage is to not create the first network state. I think the important thing is, let's make an analogy with startups. Today is not important to create Google or Uber, but it's important to create the Silicon Valley that enables thousands of different experiments, thousands of different founders to try and experiment, capital to be, of course, allocated for funding these experiments. And I'm sure that this experimentation will lead to an improvement, because the problem we had is that, again, if you want to start to be a politician in Europe, it will take many years and you can't change the foundational mechanics of a system. In this case, you can play in a peaceful and super safe way without violent approaches. You can experiment on a small scale, new dynamics, and see if they work. So this is what I think it's going to be a game changer. I'm really thankful to be here with you. And arbitration, of course, will take, have a few roles in all these pictures. So I look forward to hear your questions, and I'm sorry if this day took 10 minutes more than the 40 minutes agreed.
Thank you. I think we're going to need a whole other session to discuss dispute resolution and how that might unfold. Kelby, please, your thoughts from the trenches.
Just a silly thought. I know that many companies were born in the garage, and these days, because of today's economy, they're born in the kitchen. When you started up your company, are you starting it now in a warehouse, a place, or is it in your kitchen?
So, I mean, in the case of Jure, probably the right place was started on an airplane, because it was a phase of life where I had to really constantly travel, because especially that market of the crazy market of Web3 in 2017-18 was composed of many events, most of them useless, but again, you had to be there. So yeah, probably we were always on an airplane, but technically wise, we then had this incorporation in Zug in Switzerland, which still remains the operational company with the, we got the necessary license for operating, but yeah, I would say an airplane, an economy airplane, not business class.
And I'll chime in as to one of the people in 2002. I met my first wife, now ex-wife, online in the chat room. So I can definitely chime in and say we were part of that community, and that's how someone I didn't know became someone I did. So one question when it comes to let's say I want to be part of this community, I want to be part of this network state. Are we talking about giving up my current nationality and joining this network, or is it are we talking about dual nationality? Because then that creates a whole realm of legal issues. How do I talk to somebody? Yeah, it becomes an explosive amount of issues.
Absolutely. So there is a very nice article actually of Mario Gabriele talks about promiscuous citizenship as one of the probably upcoming trends, which means that I do believe that the future will be composed of a dual or triple citizenship owned by the same person, so that one person will be at the same time citizen of multiple kind of states, physical or non-physical ones. So for sure at this stage, without any diplomatic recognition, Kelby, I'm 100% sure that all these constructs, they are actually cumulative forms of citizenship. So they can't eliminate for sure the originating citizenship, nor of course the fiscal duties and the duties that everyone has from a fiscal perspective, based on the current set of rules of fiscal residency. I think this will be for sure the last ones to be in place. So this is what I would say right now. Personally, I think that the first step, feasible step for whatever happens in this area will be actually working in this way. So I think that there will be a sort of system of a free zone recognized by an existing country, so that the member of a network state automatically become resident by the hosting country. As an example, as it happens today in Dubai, you can become Dubai resident. So I see this as a pattern that we will work on in order to enable a concrete step which is feasible. And again, in that case, we would talk still about residency. I wouldn't see anyone losing their original citizenship.
And I won't hog the questions. I think there's a lot of questions in the chat, and Sophie, I'm sure.
You are our commentator, Kelby. So please, if you have another one, please have another one. And then I'll do a quick roundup of what's in the chat. What I'm thinking at this stage is that it's probably going to be worth, once the juror concept has matured a little bit, talking about the things to do that have appeared in the chat about dispute resolution, about enforcement, and how that plays out within the concept. But please, Kelby, if you have another one, please go ahead.
Oh, well, I was trying to grasp the idea of the benefits of the network stake. I think that was a little confusing to me, and possibly it's like, why would someone give this up? And usually someone who joins a state has a common interest. Maybe they're after a sort of resources, or they all have a common history, religion, ideas, possibly a language. So why do some people decide to join, or would decide to join the network state? What are the benefits that most people would be seeking, or is it mostly financial?
Absolutely, no, great question. So this is actually what we are working on, in the sense of, so what we are enabling right now, and one of the products will be ready in May, the creation of startup societies on chain very easily. So one point we are very focused on is to be benefit focused. That means I don't see succeeding this concept if it's just cool to be part of a club, right? I don't think if it can be just a lifestyle somehow, association, despite, I mean it depends if The Rock or Barack Obama maybe does that, a lot of people might just join because of that aspect. I see instead this concept succeeding when there is a concrete measurable benefit and a very kind of citizen-centric or customer-centric approach. So this is the duty of this, actually it's on this society founder to identify which benefits are in place. And I expect every startup society or every network state one day to have a specific set of benefits for their own citizens, so that the citizens will join. In the example, Kelby, of the digital nomad society, I think this would be a super clean shot. The benefit might be to have an international insurance, for example, for when you're traveling, so which is affordable and very well made for having you protected wherever you are in the world. Maybe a series of digital banks that have very excellent, I would say, quality of services built for digital nomads, including the capacity of erogating mortgages. As we know, these are typically problems for digital nomads to get the mortgage for buying an apartment and house, and so far and so on. So the benefit of a network state will depend on the typology of the typical citizen. In the case of the digital nomad network state, whenever it will take place or whoever will do it, I see the benefits designed in order to satisfy better those citizens, and that's why, in my view, they will join. On the digital nomad side, we have already data and validations where a lot of people will immediately actually join and subscribe, let's say. Why? Because the alternative is so terrible, right? So today it's super messy: Visa, Golden Visa, local insurance, bank account, fiscal residency, accountant, local accountant. It's so messy. And in the end, you know, my take, this personal take, it will be also a matter of user experience. It's not only a matter of blockchain, it's a matter of how well designed is the application and the service. So we are talking probably now about the infrastructure, and it's like if we're discussing in the 90s about the vision for the internet, but then we need a very cool made Amazon or service with an excellent logistic backend, or Uber with an excellent UX, Google, blah, 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 for letting the internet expressing its own somehow power and potential. So I think this is a bit the analogy. Probably 1 year from now, we will be discussing about products, network states, instead of, you know, infrastructures and similar things.
Thank you. And I've discussed this this concept with people here in the Legal Week, and many people, from cryptocurrency to any kind of cybersecurity. It's like this idea is still mind-blowing to them. It's like they've never heard of it. So it's great to hear from you, because I think this is very much a new concept to many people.
It is. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you for joining us and commenting in the chat. I think, Ali, if you have a quick look, you'll see the questions popping up. It's, I think, at one point, as I was saying, probably worth having in the course of time when things have developed a little bit at your end as well, we can talk about on a more granular basis, the governance issues, the enforcement issues, the dispute resolution issues, because one of the things that I find striking is this idea of starting with a center that then decentralizes, and how that is managed in, well, in a very practical way. Dispute resolution practicing in it that tells you a lot about human nature under stress. And the one thing I've learned about human nature is that once you have the leadership of something, it's very hard to let go of it. And I just wonder how one manages that in the network state environment. And certainly these are questions that I would love to explore on ArbTech as well. It remains, I'm conscious of the time and of the rest of your day that you have to go to, but thank you so very much, Ali and Kelby, for being with us, and all of you for your interest and participation. This is going to be available on our website to look at again if you're minded, and we have a feed on Twitter. And I look forward very much to the next installment of this discussion. Thank you to Sarah. And thank you to Mihaela of ArbTech for being here and helping us with the logistics. Have a very good and productive and happy rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks to you. Thanks to you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.